The water rushed over the banks of the swollen creek, sweeping away all in its path, as Naomi Zimmerman clung desperately to her sodden skirts, her final strength ebbing with each stumbling step along the muddy road to Provo. Utah Territory had never seemed so vast and unforgiving as it did in the spring of 1876, when the heavens opened and turned the earth to liquid beneath her feet. Naomi had lost everything in the space of a fortnight, first her father to consumption, then the family home to creditors who descended like vultures before her father's body was even cold in the ground. With nowhere else to turn, she had spent the last of her meager inheritance on passage west to her mother's cousin in Provo, a woman she had never met, but who had written once offering condolences and a place to stay, should Naomi ever find herself in need. The stagecoach had abandoned its journey 10 miles back when the road became impassable. The driver, apologetic but firm, had pointed her in the direction of town and suggested she follow the road. "Stay to the high ground, miss," he'd advised. "The creek's risen something fierce." Now, with the rain pelting her face and her boots sinking ankle-deep in mud with each step, Naomi knew she had made a terrible mistake in pressing forward. The temperature had dropped as evening approached, and her thin traveling coat, soaked through, offered no protection against the chill. Her vision blurred, whether from rain or tears she could not say, as she forced herself onward. The roar of rushing water grew louder. Rounding a bend in the road, Naomi stopped short. The creek had completely overtaken the road ahead, a churning mass of brown water that stretched for 100 yards before her. There was no way around its steep banks rose on either side, and the water showed no sign of receding. "Lord help me," she whispered, her voice lost in the storm. She turned, thinking to retrace her steps to higher ground, perhaps find shelter until morning. But her legs, already trembling from exhaustion, finally betrayed her. Darkness crowded the edges of her vision as she felt herself falling, the muddy earth rising to meet her. The last thing Naomi saw before consciousness fled was the silhouette of a rider emerging from the rain like a specter, tall in the saddle atop a massive black horse. When she opened her eyes again, warmth enveloped her. For one disorienting moment, she thought herself back in her childhood home in Boston, tucked safely in her bed as her mother sang softly nearby. Then the pain in her limbs and the unfamiliar sense of wood smoke, leather, and coffee brought reality crashing back. "You're awake." The voice, deep and quiet, came from somewhere to her right. Naomi turned her head and found herself looking at a man seated in a wooden chair near a potbelly stove. He was perhaps 30, with a weathered face that spoke of years under the western sun. His eyes, keen and assessing, were the color of the sky after a storm. "Where?" Her throat felt as though she'd swallowed sand. The man rose and crossed to a small table, returning with a tin cup of water. "Easy now," he said, helping her sit up enough to drink. "You've been through quite an ordeal." The water tasted sweeter than any wine. When she drained the cup, Naomi found her voice again. "Thank you." "Where am I?" "My cabin," he said simply. "Found you collapsed beside the flooded road about 5 miles east of Provo. You were half frozen and burning with fever at the same time. Been touch and go for 2 days." 2 days. Naomi struggled to sit up fully, alarmed at the lost time. "Whoa there," the man said, placing a restraining hand on her shoulder. It wasn't forceful, but firm enough to keep her in place. "You're not ready to be moving about just yet." Looking down, Naomi realized with a jolt that she was wearing a man's flannel shirt far too large for her frame. A flush of mortification heated her cheeks. "My clothes were soaked through and muddy. I hung them to dry." He gestured toward the fireplace where her traveling dress, petticoats, and other garments were suspended on a line. "Had to get you warm. You were shivering something fierce, teeth chattering loud enough to spook my horse. There was no impropriety in his tone, only matter-of-factness. I suppose I should thank you for saving my life, Mr. Remington, Ryker Remington. He offered a slight nod that might have been a bow in another setting. Most folks just call me Ry. I'm Naomi Zimmerman, she replied. I was traveling to Provo to stay with my mother's cousin, Mrs. Eleanor Prentice. Do you know her? Ryker's expression shifted slightly. I know of her. Town's not so big that you don't know most folks, at least by name. He poured more water into her cup. What brings a Boston lady all the way to Utah Territory? Your accent gives you away, he added when she looked surprised. Naomi sipped the water, debating how much to share with this stranger. Something in his direct gaze encouraged honesty. My father died. Creditors took our home. Mrs. Prentice is my only remaining family. Ryker nodded, accepting her sparse explanation without pressing further. The floods cut off the direct road to town, he said. Waters should recede in another day or two, then I can take you the rest of the way. I couldn't impose, it's no imposition. Can't exactly send you off alone again, can I? There was a hint of amusement in his voice. Besides, you're still recovering. Doctor said you caught a nasty chill. Doc Miller rode out yesterday when the fever didn't break, said to keep you warm and give you plenty of fluids. He gestured to a small bottle on the table. Left some medicine too. Naomi was touched by the care this stranger had shown. Thank you, Mr. Remington. I'll reimburse you for the doctor's fee and any trouble I've caused. Something like pride flickered across his face. No need for that. He stood, adjusting the blankets around her. You should rest. I'll fix some soup when you wake again. As he turned toward the stove, Naomi noticed for the first time that he moved with a slight limp, favoring his right leg. She also took in her surroundings. The cabin was small but meticulously kept, with a table and chairs, the bed she occupied, a chest of drawers and shelves holding books, surprisingly many for a frontier home. You've been most kind, she murmured as fatigue began to overtake her again. Ryker glanced back at her, his expression softening almost imperceptibly. Get some rest, Miss Zimmerman. You're warm now. The worst is over. Those words followed her into sleep, a promise of safety she hadn't felt in months. The next time Naomi awoke, bright sunlight streamed through the cabin's single window. She felt markedly improved, her head clearer, the ache in her limbs reduced to a dull soreness. Cautiously, she sat up and took stock of her situation. The cabin was empty. From outside came the sounds of chopping wood and the occasional soft nicker of a horse. Naomi's clothes, now dry, were folded neatly on a chair beside the bed. She dressed quickly, grateful for the privacy, though her corset proved a challenge to fasten on her own. She had just managed to button her dress when the cabin door opened, and Ryker entered carrying an armload of split logs. He stopped short when he saw her standing. You should have called if you needed help, he said, depositing the wood in a bin beside the stove. I've managed, Naomi replied, though she was aware that her hair hung loose and tangled down her back, her comb lost somewhere in her travels. Ryker regarded her for a moment, then turned to wash his hands in a basin on the washstand. How are you feeling? Much improved, thank you. She hesitated, then asked, Do you live here alone, Mr. Remington? Just me and Mita's, he replied, drying his hands. Mita's? My horse. A hint of a smile touched his lips. Best company a man could ask for, doesn't talk much, but he's a good listener. Despite herself, Naomi smiled. I don't wish to be a burden. Perhaps I could continue to Provo today. Ryker shook his head. Road still underwater in places. Tried it this morning. Another day, maybe two. He gestured toward the stove. Coffee's hot. Are you hungry? As if in answer, Naomi's stomach rumbled audibly, causing her cheeks to flush with embarrassment. She hadn't eaten a proper meal since leaving the stagecoach. Ryker didn't comment on her stomach's betrayal. "Sit," he said, indicating the table. "I'll fix something." Naomi obeyed, watching as he efficiently prepared a breakfast of bacon, biscuits, and eggs. His movements were precise, economical, suggesting a man accustomed to caring for himself. The limp was more noticeable as he moved about the small space. "Were you injured?" she asked before she could stop herself. Ryker glanced at his leg. "Shiloh," he said simply. "Minier ball shattered the knee. Doctors wanted to take the leg, but I was stubborn." "You fought for the Union, 6th Iowa Cavalry." He set a plate before her. "Eat while it's hot." The food was surprisingly good, the biscuits light, the eggs perfectly cooked. Naomi ate with more enthusiasm than was probably ladylike, but hunger overrode etiquette. "You cook well for a bachelor," she commented when she'd finished. "Man gets tired of beans and jerky after a while." He refilled her coffee cup. Learning to cook was self-preservation. "What brought you to Utah Territory after the war?" Ryker was quiet for a moment, his eyes distant. "Wanted open space, room to breathe. Back east, too many reminders." He didn't elaborate further. "What did you do in Boston?" Naomi traced the rim of her cup with one finger. "I was a teacher at a girls' academy, literature and music primarily. Explains the books by your valise. Saw them when I brought in your things." He nodded toward a shelf of well-worn volumes. "Help yourself if you'd like something to read." "Not much else to do while waiting for the waters to recede. Thank you." She paused, then added, "Mr. Remington, I don't know how to properly express my gratitude for your assistance. You saved my life. Anyone would have done the same. I'm not certain that's true." She thought of the stagecoach driver who had left her to fend for herself, albeit with apologies. Ryker stood, collecting their plates. "Rest today. Tomorrow, if the road's passable, I'll take you to your cousin's place." "I can help with the washing up," Naomi offered, rising from her chair. "I've got it. You're still recovering." Naomi was unaccustomed to idleness. In Boston, even as a teacher, she had managed her father's household after her mother's death 5 years earlier. "Please, I insist. You've done enough." Something like respect flickered in his eyes. He nodded once and stepped aside, allowing her access to the wash basin. They worked together in companionable silence, Naomi washing, Ryker drying and putting away the dishes. She noticed that everything in the cabin had its place, reflecting a disciplined mind. On one wall hung a cavalry saber and a daguerreotype of a younger Ryker in uniform, standing beside another soldier who shared his features. "Your brother?" she asked, nodding toward the image. Ryker's expression tightened almost imperceptibly. "Yes, Nathan. He didn't come home from Vicksburg." "I'm sorry," she said softly. "It was a long time ago." But Naomi could see that the wound remained fresh, even after 13 years. She understood grief didn't always fade with time, sometimes it just changed form. The rest of the day passed quietly. True to his word, Ryker offered his books, and Naomi lost herself in a volume of Tennyson's poetry, occasionally reading passages aloud when Ryker seemed receptive. He worked on mending a bridle, his large hands surprisingly dexterous with the leather and all. By evening, Naomi felt almost comfortable in this strange man's presence. They shared a simple supper, and afterward, Ryker surprised her by producing a harmonica from his pocket. "You mind?" he asked, holding up the instrument. "Not at all." The melodies he played were haunting old folk tunes and what she recognized as soldiers' songs from the war. Naomi found herself humming along to the ones she knew, and for a brief time, the cabin seemed less isolated, the wilderness outside less threatening. As night fell, the awkward question of sleeping arrangements arose. Naomi had occupied Ryker's bed during her illness, but now that she was recovered, propriety demanded different accommodations. "I'll sleep in the barn with Mita's," Ryker said, anticipating her concern. "That's unnecessary. I'm quite comfortable on the floor with blankets." "No," he said firmly. "You take the bed. I've slept in worse places than my own barn." His tone brooked no argument, and Naomi relented, though not without some guilt. As he prepared to leave for the night, she called after him, "Mr. Remington." He paused at the door, looking back. "Thank you for everything." He nodded once, then disappeared into the darkness, leaving Naomi alone with her thoughts and the crackling fire in the stove. Lying in his bed that night, surrounded by the scent of pine soap and leather that seemed to cling to everything Ryker owned, Naomi found herself wondering about this solitary man who had saved her life. What had driven him to this remote cabin? What demons from the war still haunted him? And why did the thought of reaching Provo tomorrow and saying goodbye fill her with an inexplicable melancholy? Morning brought clearing skies and the news that the flood waters had indeed receded enough to make the road to Provo passable. Ryker harnessed Mita's to a small wagon he kept for hauling supplies, explaining that the ride would be easier on Naomi than horseback. "I can ride," she told him, somewhat indignantly. "My father kept horses in Boston." The corner of Ryker's mouth twitched in what might have been amusement. "Boston riding and Western riding are different beasts, Miss Zimmerman. Besides, the road's still muddy in places. Wagons safer." She couldn't argue with his logic, though a part of her was disappointed. There was something romantic about the idea of riding behind him on his magnificent black horse, her arms around his waist for stability. The thought brought an unexpected warmth to her cheeks, and she busied herself with securing her few possessions to hide her reaction. The journey to Provo took longer than the usual 5 miles would suggest. Twice they had to detour around sections of road still underwater, and once Ryker had to lead Mita's carefully across a stretch where the road had partially washed away, leaving a treacherous slope. Throughout the journey, Ryker pointed out landmarks and shared small pieces of information about the area where the best fishing was to be found, which meadows bloomed most spectacularly in spring, the distant mountains where he sometimes hunted in autumn. His words painted a picture of a life connected to the land in a way Naomi had never experienced in the city. "It must be lonely," she observed as they crested a hill that afforded a view of Provo in the distance, the settlement looking almost toy-like against the backdrop of mountains. Ryker considered her words before answering. "There's a difference between being alone and being lonely." "Which are you, Mr. Remington?" His eyes met hers, searching. Whatever he saw there made him turn away. "We should reach town within the hour," he said instead of answering. They rode in silence after that, each lost in private thoughts until the wagon rolled onto Provo's main street. The town was larger than Naomi had expected, several blocks of sturdy buildings, a church steeple rising prominently, businesses displaying signs advertising their services. "Where does your cousin live?" Ryker asked, slowing the wagon. "Center Street," she wrote, "the house with blue shutters." He nodded and guided Mita's through the muddy streets. Townspeople nodded greetings as they passed, many eyeing Naomi with undisguised curiosity. She became acutely aware of her rumpled appearance after days in the same traveling dress. They found Mrs. Prentice's house, easily enough, a neat 2-story structure with the promised blue shutters, and a small garden out front. Ryker helped Naomi down from the wagon, his hands strong and steady at her waist. For a moment they stood close enough that she could see the flecks of gray in his blue eyes. "Thank you again, Mr. Remington," she said softly. "I'm forever in your debt." "No debt between us," he replied, his voice equally low. "I'm glad you're safe, Miss Zimmerman." He stepped back, and the moment broke. Naomi gathered her courage and approached the front door, aware of Ryker watching from beside the wagon. Before she could knock, the door swung open to reveal a gray-haired woman with a stern expression. "Yes?" the woman asked, her gaze moving between Naomi and Ryker. "Mrs. Prentice. I'm Naomi Zimmerman, Harriet's daughter." "You wrote to me after my mother passed." The woman's expression did not soften. "That was 5 years ago," Naomi faltered. "Yes, but you said if I ever needed." "My father recently passed, and I had nowhere else to turn." Mrs. Prentice sighed heavily. "I heard about Thomas's death. The telegram arrived yesterday." She glanced past Naomi to where Ryker stood. "Who is this man?" "Mr. Remington rescued me during the flood. He's been most kind." The older woman's lips pressed into a thin line. "I see." She stepped back from the doorway. "You'd better come in, Naomi. We have much to discuss." Naomi turned back to Ryker, suddenly reluctant to leave him. "Goodbye, Mr. Remington. I won't forget your kindness." He touched the brim of his hat in salute. "Take care, Miss Zimmerman." As the door closed behind her, Naomi heard the creak of wagon wheels as Ryker drove away. A strange emptiness settled in her chest, as though something precious had slipped through her fingers before she'd properly recognized its value. Mrs. Prentice's welcome was correct, but cool. She showed Naomi to a small bedroom under the eaves, the maid's room, when I could afford to keep one, and explained the house rules with brisk efficiency. Meals were at 7, noon, and 6. The Sabbath was strictly observed. Naomi would be expected to contribute to the household, perhaps by giving piano lessons to local children. "I cannot afford charity cases," Mrs. Prentice said bluntly over tea. "Even family." "I don't expect charity," Naomi replied, stiffening her spine. "I'm a qualified teacher. I intend to find employment." The school might have a position. I'll speak to Reverend Caldwell on Sunday." Mrs. Prentice studied her over the rim of her teacup. "That man who brought you Remington. What exactly transpired between you?" The implication was clear, and Naomi felt heat rise to her face. "He saved my life, nothing more. Mr. Remington was a perfect gentleman. He lives alone in that cabin of his, keeps to himself. People talk." "Let them talk," Naomi said with more spirit than she'd intended. "Mr. Remington is a war veteran who deserves respect, not gossip." Mrs. Prentice raised an eyebrow at her vehemence but didn't pursue the subject further. "Well, you're here now. We'll make the best of it." The next few days were an exercise in adjustment. Naomi found Mrs. Prentice to be rigid in her routines and expectations, but not unkind. The older woman had lived alone since her husband's death, 10 years earlier, and had grown set in her ways. She viewed Naomi's arrival with a mixture of familial duty and inconvenience. Provo itself was a revelation to Naomi. The town had grown rapidly since the railroad's arrival, bringing a diversity of people and ideas that surprised her. There were the expected frontier establishments, a saloon, mercantile, livery stable, and hotel, but also a lending library, a women's auxiliary, and even a small theater that occasionally hosted traveling shows. By the end of her first week, Naomi had secured a position at the local school teaching the younger children. The salary was modest, but combined with piano lessons given in the evenings, she would be able to pay Mrs. Prentice for room and board and perhaps save a little besides. Yet despite these successes, Naomi found herself looking for a tall figure with a slight limp whenever she ventured into town. Ryker rarely came to Provo, Mrs. Prentice had informed her, perhaps once a month for supplies. Naomi told herself that her disappointment at not seeing him was merely a wish to properly thank him again, nothing more. Life settled into a routine. Naomi taught during the day, gave music lessons in the evenings, and attended church on Sundays. She made acquaintances, if not friends, the other teachers, some of the mothers of her students, members of the church choir she joined at Mrs. Prentice's insistence. Several young men of the town began to pay her attention. The blacksmith's son brought her wildflowers. A clerk at the mercantile offered to carry her packages. The widowed banker, 20 years her senior but considered a good catch, invited her to Sunday dinner. Naomi was polite but distant with all of them. Her heart, she was beginning to realize, had been left at a small cabin 5 miles outside of town. A month after her arrival in Provo, Naomi was returning from school when she spotted a familiar black horse tied outside the mercantile. Her heart quickened as she hesitated, debating whether to continue home or to accidentally encounter Ryker. Propriety warred with desire. A lady did not seek out a gentleman's company without proper introduction or chaperone. But this was the West, where such strictures were more relaxed by necessity. And besides, they had already spent days in each other's company under the most unusual of circumstances. Before she could decide, the mercantile door opened and Ryker emerged, his arms laden with supplies. He looked much as she remembered, tall and solid, his movements sure despite the limp, his face partly shadowed by his hat. He paused when he saw her, and something flickered across his features too quickly to name. "Miss Zimmerman," he said, tipping his hat with his free hand. "Mr. Remington," she replied, suddenly conscious of her plain work dress and hair arranged in a simple knot. "How fortunate to see you in town. Just picking up supplies." He glanced at the packages in her arms, books and papers to grade. "Teaching suits you." Naomi was surprised. "How did you know I was teaching?" A faint smile touched his lips. "Small town, word gets around." He secured his supplies to meet his saddle. "How are you finding Provo?" "It's quite pleasant. Different from Boston, of course, but the people have been welcoming." She hesitated, then added, "Mrs. Prentice has been very kind." Ryker made a non-committal sound that suggested he might have a different opinion of her cousin's kindness. "And your health, fully recovered?" "Yes, thanks to your care." Naomi took a step closer. "I never properly thanked you, no need." He adjusted Mita's bridle, his eyes everywhere but on her face. "I should be getting back. Daylight's burning." "Of course." Disappointment coursed through her. "It was good to see you, Mr. Remington." He finally met her gaze then, and the intensity in his blue eyes stole her breath. "You as well, Miss Zimmerman." Before she could say more, he swung into the saddle with a grace that belied his injured leg and touched his hat brim once more. "Take care." Naomi watched him ride away, the space between them growing with each hoofbeat. Only when he had disappeared from view did she realize she was still standing in the middle of the street, clutching her books to her chest like a lovesick schoolgirl. That evening, as she picked at her dinner under Mrs. Prentice's watchful eye, Naomi made a decision. Life was too unpredictable, too fragile to waste on propriety and others' expectations. She had nearly died once already. Who knew what tomorrow might bring? "I saw Mr. Remington in town today," she said casually, breaking the silence that typically accompanied their meals. Mrs. Prentice's fork paused halfway to her mouth. "Oh, yes, he inquired after my health." Naomi kept her tone light. "I was thinking I should bring him something as a thank you for saving my life. Perhaps some baked goods." "That seems excessive," Mrs. Prentice replied. "You've already expressed your gratitude, I presume. One can never be too grateful for one's life." Naomi met her cousin's disapproving gaze steadily. "I thought perhaps this Saturday I might ride out to his cabin, alone. That would be most improper. Perhaps you would accompany me, Mrs. Prentice set down her fork. "Naomi, I understand you feel indebted to Mr. Remington, but a young woman in your position must be mindful of appearances. Seeking out the company of a single man who lives alone outside of town will invite talk. I'm not seeking his company, Naomi protested, though the lie tasted bitter. I merely wish to express my gratitude properly. A note would suffice. A note seems inadequate for saving one's life. Mrs. Prentice studied her with shrewd eyes. Naomi, are you developing feelings for this man? The directness of the question caught Naomi off guard. She opened her mouth to deny it, then closed it again, unwilling to lie outright. Her cousin sighed heavily. I feared as much. Ryker Remington is not husband material, my dear. He's a recluse, damaged by the war in ways that go beyond that leg of his. People say he sometimes wakes the night with screams that carry across the valley. What kind of life would that be for you? You don't know him, Naomi said quietly. Neither do you, not really. Mrs. Prentice's tone softened slightly. You've built him up in your mind as some heroic figure because he rescued you. That's natural, but it's not a foundation for lasting affection. Naomi pushed her plate away, appetite gone. With respect, Cousin Alina, I believe I know my own mind. You're still grieving your father, vulnerable, making rash decisions. Perhaps, Naomi conceded. But should that prevent me from following my heart? Mrs. Prentice's expression hardened. While you live under my roof, you will abide by my rules. No unchaperoned visits to Mr. Remington's cabin. If you wish to thank him, do so in town, in public, with proper decorum. Naomi inclined her head in apparent acquiescence, but inwardly her resolve strengthened. She would find a way to see Ryker again, with or without her cousin's blessing. The opportunity came sooner than expected. 3 days later, as Naomi was returning from school, she encountered Reverend Caldwell outside the church. Miss Zimmerman, just the person I hoped to see. The kindly old minister beckoned her closer. I have a favor to ask of you. Of course, Reverend. How may I help? I've received word that Mr. Remington has taken ill. Influenza, most likely. He managed to get a message to town with a passing hunter. The Reverend's face creased with concern. I would go myself, but my rheumatism is acting up something fierce with this damp weather. Naomi's heart lurched. Is he alone out there? That's my worry. Man shouldn't be alone when fever strikes. He held out a basket. I've gathered some medicines and food. Would you be willing to deliver them? The school's closed tomorrow for the teachers' meeting, I believe. I would, Naomi said quickly, perhaps too quickly judging by the Reverend's raised eyebrow. That is, I feel a particular obligation to Mr. Remington, given his kindness to me. Reverend Caldwell nodded slowly. I thought you might feel that way. However, propriety must be observed. I've asked Mrs. Miller, the doctor's wife, to accompany you. She has nursing experience and can assess his condition. Disappointment and relief warred within Naomi. A chaperone would limit any private conversation with Ryker, but at least she would see him. Mrs. Miller will meet you at the livery at 8 tomorrow morning, the Reverend continued. The liveryman has been instructed to provide a wagon. Thank you, Reverend. I'll be ready. That night, Naomi could barely sleep. Worry for Ryker's health combined with anticipation at seeing him again kept her tossing and turning. When she finally drifted off near dawn, her dreams were filled with rushing water and a pair of storm-blue eyes. Morning came too slowly, and then all at once. Naomi dressed with particular care, choosing her most flattering day dress and arranging her hair in a style more elaborate than her usual simple knot. Mrs. Prentice watched these preparations with a knowing eye but said nothing, having already given reluctant permission for the errand. Once she learned Mrs. Miller would accompany Naomi. Mrs. Miller proved to be a pleasant woman in her 50s with a no-nonsense manner and kind eyes. She looked Naomi over as they settled into the wagon and gave an approving nod. "You look pretty as a picture, dear, though I doubt Mr. Remington will notice much in his condition if the hunter's description was accurate." Naomi felt her cheeks warm. "I merely wished to look presentable, Mrs. Miller's expression suggested she wasn't fooled but was too polite to say so. "It's a good thing you're coming along. Mr. Remington's more likely to accept help from someone he's already assisted. Proud man, from what my husband says." The journey to Ryker's cabin seemed both interminable and too brief. Naomi's emotions careened between anxiety about his condition and nervousness about seeing him again. When the familiar structure came into view, her heart began to race. No smoke rose from the chimney, which immediately struck Naomi as worrisome. If Ryker was ill with fever, surely he would keep a fire burning for warmth. Mrs. Miller noticed too. "That's not a good sign," she murmured, urging the horses faster. They found Midas in his small corral, nickering anxiously when they approached. The magnificent black horse paced the enclosure, clearly distressed. "When was that hunter here?" Naomi asked as they hurried toward the cabin door. "Day before yesterday, Mrs. Miller replied, her medical bag clutched in one hand. Naomi's concern deepened. 2 days alone with influenza could be dangerous, even fatal. She knocked firmly on the door. "Mr. Remington, Ryker, it's Naomi Zimmerman." Silence greeted them. Mrs. Miller tried the latch and found it unlocked. The door swung open to reveal the cabin's interior, dimly lit with all shutters closed. The smell hit them first: sickness and sweat, the unmistakable odor of a sick room. As their eyes adjusted to the gloom, Naomi saw Ryker lying on his bed, blankets tangled around him. Even from the doorway, she could see he was shivering despite the beads of sweat on his forehead. "Oh, dear Lord," Mrs. Miller murmured, rushing forward. "He's burning up." Naomi followed, her heart in her throat. Ryker's eyes were closed, his breathing labored. He looked terribly vulnerable, this strong man laid low by illness. Mrs. Miller laid a practiced hand on his brow. "High fever, probably hasn't had water in a day or more." She turned to Naomi. "We need to cool him down, find clean cloths and a basin. I'll get my medicines ready." Naomi sprang into action, locating Ryker's wash basin and filling it with water from the pump outside. She found clean cloths in a chest of drawers and returned to find Mrs. Miller coaxing Ryker to swallow some liquid from a small bottle. "He's delirious," the older woman said. "Keeps talking about Shiloh and someone named Nathan." "His brother," Naomi explained softly. "He died at Vicksburg." Mrs. Miller nodded grimly. "War never really ends for some men. Keep bathing his face and neck with cool water while I prepare a stronger dose of willow bark tea." For the next hour, they worked together to bring Ryker's fever down. Naomi gently wiped his face and neck with cool cloths, murmuring reassurances when he thrashed or called out in delirium. His strength, even weakened by illness, was impressive once he gripped her wrist so tightly she had to pry his fingers loose. "Talk to him," Mrs. Miller advised as she prepared more medicine. "Familiar voices can sometimes reach through the fever dreams." Naomi leaned close, one hand continuing to bathe his burning skin. "Ryker, it's Naomi. You're going to be all right. We're here to help you." She hesitated, then added softly, "I came back, just as you came for me." Something in his restless movements eased slightly at the sound of her voice. Encouraged, she continued speaking, telling him about her students, about the town gossip, about the books she'd read since arriving in Provo, anything to maintain a steady stream of words that might anchor him to the present. By late afternoon, Mrs. Miller pronounced the crisis passing. Ryker's fever had dropped and his breathing was easier. He had briefly opened his eyes once, seeming to recognize Naomi before slipping back into sleep, but it was natural sleep now, not the restless unconsciousness of fever. "He'll need careful watching tonight, Mrs. Miller said, packing her medical bag. "I should return to town. My husband will worry, and I have other patients to check on. Will you stay with him?" Naomi hesitated only a moment before nodding. "Yes, I can't leave him alone." "I thought you might say that, Mrs. Miller's eyes were kind but shrewd. "I'll tell your cousin that medical necessity requires your presence here. The Reverend will back me up, I'm sure." "Thank you," Naomi said simply. After Mrs. Miller departed with the wagon, promising to return the next day, Naomi found herself alone with Ryker. The cabin was quiet except for his even breathing and the occasional crackle from the fire she had built in the stove. She busied herself straightening the cabin, washing the used cloths, and preparing a simple broth from supplies in the Reverend's basket. As darkness fell, she lit the oil lamp and settled in the chair beside Ryker's bed, a book in her lap, but her attention fixed on the rise and fall of his chest. Sometime later, Naomi wasn't sure how long, having dozed off in the chair, a hoarse voice broke the silence. "You came back." She started awake to find Ryker watching her, his eyes clear for the first time since they'd arrived. Relief flooded through her. "How are you feeling?" she asked, leaning forward to lay a hand on his forehead. "Still warm, but no longer burning. Like I've been trampled by a herd of buffalo." He attempted to sit up, grimaced, and fell back against the pillows. "Don't try to move yet," Naomi cautioned. "You've been very ill. Mrs. Miller says you need rest and fluids." "Mrs. Miller was here." He looked confused. "She'll return tomorrow." "We came together when the Reverend received your message." Naomi reached for a cup of willow bark tea that had been steeping. "Can you drink this? It will help with the fever." Ryker allowed her to help him sit up enough to drink, his large hand covering hers briefly on the cup. The simple contact sent warmth through her that had nothing to do with the tea's temperature. "Thank you," he said when he drained the cup. "You didn't have to come." "Of course I did." Naomi set the cup aside. "You saved my life. Did you think I'd leave you to suffer alone?" Something vulnerable passed across his features before he masked it. "Most would." "I'm not most people, Mr. Remington." A ghost of a smile touched his lips. "No, you're certainly not, Miss Zimmerman." Their eyes held for a long moment, something unspoken passing between them. Then Ryker's gaze shifted to the window, where night had fallen completely. "You shouldn't be here alone," he said. "Your reputation is less important than your health," Naomi finished firmly. "Besides, Mrs. Miller will vouch for the propriety of the situation. Medical necessity." Ryker didn't look convinced, but he was clearly too exhausted to argue further. His eyelids drooped despite his evident effort to stay awake. "Rest," Naomi told him gently. "I'll be here when you wake." He searched her face as though looking for something specific, then nodded slightly. "Thank you," he murmured, already drifting off. Naomi watched him sleep, allowing herself the luxury of studying his features without self-consciousness. The strong line of his jaw, now covered in several days' worth of beard. The slight furrow between his brows that remained even in sleep, as though he could never fully relax his vigilance. The faint scar at his temple that disappeared into his hairline. "I think I'm falling in love with you," she whispered to his sleeping form, testing the words she wasn't yet brave enough to say when he could hear them. The night passed quietly. Naomi dozed in the chair, waking every hour or so to check on Ryker, who slept deeply. By dawn, her neck and back ached from the uncomfortable position, but she felt a deep satisfaction at having kept her vigil. She was at the stove preparing coffee when Ryker awoke again. He pushed himself to a sitting position with visible effort, the blanket falling to his waist to reveal that he wore only a simple undershirt. Naomi averted her eyes, suddenly conscious of the intimacy of their situation. "Coffee smells good," he said, his voice still rough from illness. Naomi poured a cup and brought it to him, careful to maintain a proper distance now that he was fully conscious. "How are you feeling this morning?" "Better." He sipped the coffee, watching her over the rim of the cup. "You stayed all night." It wasn't a question, but Naomi answered anyway. "Yes." "You needed looking after." "I'm not used to being looked after." There was something in his tone she couldn't quite decipher, gratitude perhaps, but also discomfort. "Everyone needs help sometimes," she replied, "even stubborn cowboys." That drew a small smile from him. "I'm not a cowboy. Just a man with a small horse ranch." "You raise horses." This was new information. Ryker nodded. "Breed and train them. Sell to the army mostly, some to ranchers and townspeople." He gestured vaguely toward the window. "Have a dozen or so in the south pasture besides Mita's." "I'd like to see them sometime," Naomi said, then blushed at the presumption in her words. Ryker regarded her thoughtfully. "You would?" Before she could answer, a knock at the door announced Mrs. Miller's return. The older woman bustled in, took one look at Ryker sitting up and drinking coffee, and declared it a good sign. "Fever's broken properly," she announced after examining him. "Still weak as a kitten, I'd wager, but on the mend." "I'm fine," Ryker insisted, though his pallor and the slight tremor in his hands belied his words. Mrs. Miller snorted. "Men, always fine until they're flat on their backs." She turned to Naomi. "You look exhausted, dear. Did you sleep at all?" "Enough," Naomi assured her. "I'm just glad Mr. Remington is improving." "Well, we should get you back to town. Your cousin will be worried, and Mr. Remington needs rest, not pretty company to distract him." Naomi felt heat rise to her face at the knowing look Mrs. Miller gave her. Ryker, too, seemed suddenly fascinated by the contents of his coffee cup. "I'll gather my things," Naomi said, moving toward her shawl and reticule. "Miss Zimmerman," Ryker called as she reached the door. When she turned back, he met her gaze directly. "Thank you for coming back." The words held a weight beyond simple gratitude, and Naomi found herself momentarily speechless. She nodded once, not trusting her voice, and followed Mrs. Miller outside. As they drove away, Naomi couldn't resist looking back at the cabin. Ryker stood in the doorway, one hand braced against the frame for support, watching them go. The image stayed with her all the way back to Provo. Mrs. Prentice was predictably displeased with Naomi's overnight absence, despite Mrs. Miller's explanation of medical necessity. She listened in tight-lipped silence to their account, then fixed Naomi with a severe look once they were alone. "I hope you realize what you've done," she said. "Tongues will wag." "Let them," Naomi replied with more confidence than she felt. "I did what was right." "What's right and what's proper are not always the same thing." Mrs. Prentice sighed heavily. "You're determined to ruin yourself over this man, aren't you?" The accusation stung. "I'm determined to follow my conscience and my heart. If that leads to ruin in the eyes of society, so be it." Such dramatic declarations. "You hardly know him." "I know enough," Naomi said quietly. "I know he's honorable and kind. I know he lives with pain, both physical and emotional, yet doesn't let it embitter him. I know he saved my life without expectation of reward or recognition." Mrs. Prentice studied her with shrewd eyes. "You love him." It wasn't a question, and Naomi didn't treat it as one. "Yes. And does he return your feelings?" "I don't know," Naomi admitted. "He's difficult to read." "Men like Ryker Remington don't make good husbands, Naomi. They're too damaged, too solitary. You'd be forever trying to heal wounds that can't be healed." "Perhaps I don't wish to heal him," Naomi replied. "Perhaps I simply wish to walk beside him, wounds and all." Mrs. Prentice shook her head. "You're so like your mother, headstrong and romantic." It didn't serve her well in life, and I fear it won't serve you either." The comparison to her mother, whom Naomi had adored, softened her stance slightly. "I appreciate your concern, Cousin Alina, truly, but I must follow my own path." "Well, that path is currently leading to a great deal of gossip," Mrs. Prentice said briskly. "Best prepare yourself for Sunday services. You'll be the main course at the church luncheon." Mrs. Prentice's prediction proved accurate. At Sunday services, Naomi felt the weight of curious and judgmental gazes. Whispers followed her down the aisle, and several women who had previously been friendly now offered only cool nods of acknowledgement. The Reverend's sermon on the Good Samaritan seemed pointed, though whether in her defense or as a rebuke, Naomi couldn't quite determine. After the service, as congregants gathered on the church steps, she overheard snatches of conversation that made her cheeks burn. "Spent the night alone with him. Mrs. Miller says it was perfectly proper. Always been odd, that Remington fellow. Such a shame, she seemed like a nice young woman." Naomi held her head high, but the scrutiny was wearing. By the time she and Mrs. Prentice returned home, her nerves were frayed. "I told you," Mrs. Prentice said as they removed their hats and gloves. "Small towns have long memories. This won't blow over quickly." "I did nothing wrong," Naomi insisted. "Intent matters less than appearance in these matters." Her cousin's tone softened slightly. "I don't say this to hurt you, Naomi, but to prepare you. Your position at the school might be in jeopardy if the board feels your moral character is in question." The possibility hadn't occurred to Naomi. "Surely they wouldn't dismiss me over an act of Christian charity. They might. Or parents might withdraw their children," Mrs. Prentice sighed. "I'll speak to some of the ladies in the auxiliary. Perhaps I can smooth things over." Naomi was touched by the unexpected support. "Thank you." "Don't thank me yet. And for heaven's sake, don't go running off to that cabin again. At least not alone." The warning proved unnecessary. For the next 2 weeks, Naomi had no opportunity to see Ryker, even had she been inclined to risk further scandal. The school board, while not dismissing her outright, had called a special meeting to discuss her situation, and had asked her to maintain exemplary conduct while they deliberated. Naomi threw herself into her teaching, determined to prove her worth through dedication and results. Her students, at least, were unchanged in their affection for her, too young to understand the adult whispers that surrounded their teacher. Word reached town that Ryker was recovered and back to his usual routines. Naomi heard this from the Reverend, who had ridden out to check on him and returned with assurances of his health. She was grateful for the news but frustrated at the distance circumstances had forced between them. Had their brief connection meant anything to him? Or had she imagined the significance in his eyes when he thanked her for coming back? The answer came unexpectedly on a Thursday afternoon, as Naomi was dismissing her students for the day. Through the schoolhouse window, she spotted a familiar black horse tied to the hitching post outside. Her heart leapt into her throat. "Class dismissed," she told the children, her voice betraying more excitement than was perhaps appropriate for the routine end of a school day. As the children filed out, several of them stopped to stare at the imposing figure waiting beside the horse. Ryker looked considerably improved from when she'd last seen him. His color was back, and he stood straight and tall despite the habitual slight favor of his right leg. He'd trimmed his beard and wore clean clothing, as though making an effort with his appearance. Naomi gathered her papers with hands that suddenly trembled. Taking a deep breath to compose herself, she walked to the schoolhouse door. Ryker removed his hat as she appeared. "Miss Zimmerman, Mr. Remington, I'm glad to see you recovered. Thanks to you." His eyes held hers, serious and intent. "May I walk with you?" Naomi hesitated, acutely aware of the curious gazes of lingering students and parents. "People will talk. Let them," he said, echoing her own words to Mrs. Prentice. "I need to speak with you." She nodded and fell into step beside him, conscious of maintaining a proper distance as they walked along Provo's main street. Neither spoke until they had passed the busiest section of town and reached the small park near the church. "I understand you've had trouble because of me," Ryker finally said, his voice low. "The Reverend mentioned the school board's concerns." "It's nothing," Naomi assured him, though the worry had been eating at her. "They're being cautious, that's all." Ryker's jaw tightened. "It's not right. You helped a sick man, nothing more. People see what they want to see." Naomi sat on a bench beneath a cottonwood tree, and after a moment's hesitation, Ryker joined her, leaving appropriate space between them. "How are you truly feeling?" "Better. Strong enough to ride into town, obviously." He twisted his hat in his hands, a gesture she recognized as nervousness. "I came to thank you properly, and to apologize." "You have nothing to apologize for." "I do. My illness put you in an impossible position." He looked down at his hat, then back at her with sudden determination. "But I can't bring myself to regret that you were there when I woke up." Naomi's pulse quickened. "Nor do I regret coming to your aid, even knowing the consequences, even then." She met his gaze steadily. "Some things are worth the risk." Something in Ryker's expression changed, softened. "Naomi." Miss Zimmerman." The sharp voice cut through the moment like a knife. Naomi turned to see Mrs. Caldwell, the Reverend's wife and a member of the school board, approaching with rapid steps and a thunderous expression. "Mrs. Caldwell," Naomi acknowledged, rising from the bench. The older woman's gaze darted between Naomi and Ryker, lips pursed in disapproval. "I was just on my way to speak with you about the board's decision. I see I've interrupted something." "Not at all," Ryker said, also standing. "Miss Zimmerman was kind enough to update me on my horse's training. I sold a colt to the school for the children to learn riding." The smooth lie surprised Naomi, but she quickly composed her features to reveal nothing. Mrs. Caldwell didn't appear entirely convinced. "Indeed. Well, Mr. Remington, if you'll excuse us, I need to speak with Miss Zimmerman on a school matter." Ryker nodded, donning his hat. "Of course. Good day, ladies." He caught Naomi's eye briefly before turning away, a look that conveyed both frustration at the interruption and a promise of continuation. Once he was out of earshot, Mrs. Caldwell rounded on Naomi. "Really, Miss Zimmerman, after everything that's been said, to meet with that man alone in public?" "We were hardly alone, Mrs. Caldwell," Naomi replied, gesturing to the park where several people were visible. "And I fail to see what's improper about a conversation in broad daylight. It's the appearance of the thing." Mrs. Caldwell shook her head. "Fortunately for you, the board has decided not to terminate your position. Reverend Caldwell spoke quite persuasively on your behalf, and several parents attested to your excellent teaching." Relief washed over Naomi. "Thank you. I'm grateful for the board's understanding." "Don't thank me yet," Mrs. Caldwell cautioned. "The decision comes with conditions. You are to maintain the highest standard of moral conduct. No more overnight nursing visits, no unchaperoned meetings with single men, and—" She hesitated, then pressed on. "No further association with Mr. Remington. The board feels he's not a suitable acquaintance for a young woman in your position." Naomi stared at her in disbelief. "You cannot dictate whom I may speak to in my personal time." "We can dictate the conditions of your continued employment." Mrs. Caldwell's tone was implacable. "The children's moral education is as important as their academic learning. Their teacher must be above reproach." Anger flared in Naomi's chest. "Is helping a sick veteran now considered reproachable? You know perfectly well it's more complicated than that. Mrs. Caldwell sighed. Miss Zimmerman, you're an excellent teacher. The children adore you. Don't throw away your position and reputation for whatever this is. The implication in her tone was clear. Naomi straightened her spine, summoning her dignity. Thank you for informing me of the board's decision, Mrs. Caldwell. I'll need to consider my response. Don't be foolish, girl. Good teaching positions don't grow on trees, especially for unmarried women. Neither does self-respect, Naomi replied quietly. Good day, Mrs. Caldwell. She walked away with measured steps, though inside she was trembling with indignation. The choice being presented was impossible, her livelihood or her heart. How could she possibly decide, Mrs. Prentice was surprisingly sympathetic when Naomi explained the situation that evening. It's heavy-handed, her cousin admitted, pouring tea. Though not unexpected, the board has always been dominated by the more conservative elements of the community. What should I do? Naomi asked, feeling uncharacteristically lost. Mrs. Prentice considered her over the rim of her teacup. That depends on what you truly want. Is teaching your calling, or is there someone more important to you? Why must it be either or? Why can't I teach and also? Naomi hesitated. And also love a man the community considers unsuitable, Mrs. Prentice finished for her, because life is rarely that accommodating, especially for women. Naomi stared into her tea, searching for answers in its amber depths. I don't even know if he feels the same way. We've never spoken of feelings. But you believe he does. I think so. There's something between us, something important. Naomi looked up at her cousin. Is it foolish to risk everything for something that might not even exist? Mrs. Prentice's expression softened unexpectedly. Did I ever tell you why I came west, Naomi? To join your husband, I assumed. Gerald came later. Mrs. Prentice set down her cup. I came because of a man named Samuel. He was a surveyor for the railroad, brilliant and kind, with dreams as big as the western sky. My parents forbade the match. He had no family connections, no fortune. When he asked me to follow him west, I refused. Duty and propriety seemed more important than love. Naomi had never seen such vulnerability in her cousin's face. What happened? He died in a rockslide 6 months later. By then, I had married Gerald, a suitable match approved by my family. She gave a sad smile. Gerald was a good man, and we had a comfortable life, but I've often wondered what might have been if I'd had the courage to follow my heart instead of society's expectations. The revelation stunned Naomi. I had no idea. Few do. It's not something I speak of often. Mrs. Prentice reached across the table to take Naomi's hand. I'm not saying you should throw caution to the wind, but don't make my mistake of letting fear disguise itself as duty. What about the school? The children need me. They do, but there will be other teachers. Mrs. Prentice squeezed her hand. Whatever you decide, I'll support you, even if it means facing down the entire ladies' auxiliary myself. Tears pricked at Naomi's eyes at this unexpected alliance. Thank you, Cousin Alina. That night, Naomi lay awake considering her options. By dawn, she had made her decision. She rose early, wrote a lengthy letter, and delivered it to the school board before the day's classes began. Then she taught with more passion and joy than she had felt in weeks, savoring each moment with her students. When the final bell rang, she gathered the children close. I have something important to tell you, she said, looking into their upturned faces. Tomorrow will be my last day as your teacher. Cries of dismay erupted from the children. Naomi raised her hands for quiet. I've loved teaching each of you, she continued once they had settled. You've made me very proud with your hard work and kind hearts. But sometimes, even grown-ups need to make difficult choices. Are you going away, Miss Zimmerman? Asked Emily, a 7-year-old with serious eyes. I don't know yet, Naomi answered honestly, but I know that wherever I go, I'll carry memories of you all with me. Is it because of Mr. Remington? Asked Thomas, one of the older boys. My pa says you're sweet on him. Several children giggled, and Naomi felt heat rise to her cheeks. That's enough, Thomas. Now, for tomorrow, I'd like you all to bring in your favorite book. We'll have a special reading day to say goodbye. The children filed out subdued, many hugging her before they left. Naomi remained at her desk after they had gone, staring at the empty classroom and wondering if she had made the right choice. She was still sitting there when a shadow fell across her desk. Looking up, she found Ryker standing in the doorway, hat in hand. I heard a rumor, he said without preamble, that you're resigning. Naomi nodded. News travels fast in Provo. Why? He stepped into the room, his expression unreadable. The board gave me an ultimatum. Keep my position or keep my association with you. Naomi met his gaze directly. I chose the latter. Something flickered in Ryker's eyes, surprise, followed by an emotion she couldn't quite name. You shouldn't have done that, not for me. I didn't do it for you, Naomi replied, rising from her desk. I did it for myself. I won't let others dictate whom I may know or care for. Ryker took another step closer. Naomi, I can't ask you to sacrifice your career, your reputation. You didn't ask, she interrupted. I chose. There's a difference. But why? His voice held genuine bewilderment. I'm not worth it. I'm just a broken-down soldier with bad dreams and a ranch miles from nowhere. Naomi's heart ached at his self-assessment. You're so much more than that. You're kind and honorable and brave. You saved my life when you could have ridden past. You built a home and a business from nothing. Your scars, visible and invisible, are proof of your courage, not your brokenness. Ryker stared at her, stunned by her passionate defense. You see more in me than exists. No, I see you clearly, perhaps more clearly than you see yourself. Naomi took a deep breath, gathering her courage. I love you, Ryker Remington. I think I began to love you when I woke in your cabin after the flood, and every moment since has only deepened that feeling. The confession hung in the air between them. Ryker's expression cycled through disbelief, wonder, and something like fear before settling into a cautious hope. I never thought. He began, then stopped, seeming to struggle for words. When I found you by that flooded road, I was just doing what anyone would do. I never imagined it would lead to this to you. Is this unwelcome? Naomi asked, suddenly uncertain. No, he said quickly. God, no. It's just unexpected. I've been alone so long, I'd forgotten how to be anything else. He took another step toward her, close enough now that she could see the flecks of gray in his blue eyes. I don't have pretty words like you do. But I haven't stopped thinking about you since the day I found you half drowned by that creek. When I was sick with fever, your voice was the only thing that made sense in the chaos. Hope bloomed in Naomi's chest. What are you saying, Ryker? I'm saying I love you too. The words seemed to surprise him as much as they delighted her. I didn't plan it, didn't want it, fought against it, but there it is. I love you, Naomi Zimmerman, though heaven knows why you'd want a man like me. Joy, pure and overwhelming, surged through Naomi. She closed the remaining distance between them and laid her hand against his cheek. Because you're exactly the man I want. Exactly the man I need. Ryker covered her hand with his own, turning his face to press a kiss to her palm. The tender gesture made her breath catch. What happens now? He asked, his voice rough with emotion. I don't know, Naomi admitted. I haven't planned beyond tomorrow. Come to the ranch, he said suddenly. Not just to visit, to stay. Marry me. The directness of the proposal startled a laugh from her. Just like that, just like that. His eyes held hers, serious and sure. I know it's fast. I know people will talk even more, but I don't want to waste any more time. Life's too uncertain, too precious for that. Naomi thought of Mrs. Prentice's story, of opportunities lost to propriety and fear. "Yes," she said simply. "I'll marry you." Ryker's expression transformed with a joy so raw and unguarded it made her heart ache. He pulled her into his arms, and when his lips met hers, Naomi knew with absolute certainty that she had made the right choice. Their wedding took place 2 weeks later in Reverend Caldwell's parlor rather than the church, a concession to the still scandalized sensibilities of certain town matrons. Mrs. Prentice stood as Naomi's witness, her tacit approval doing much to quiet the worst of the gossip. To Naomi's surprise, several of her former students attended with their parents, bringing small gifts and tearful hugs. Mrs. Miller was there too, beaming with satisfaction. "I knew from the moment I saw you bathing his fevered brow that this day would come," she told Naomi as they shared cake after the ceremony. "Some things are just meant to be." The move to Ryker's ranch, their ranch, now brought challenges Naomi hadn't anticipated. The isolation, the physical demands of frontier life, the adjustment to living with a man still haunted by war memories that sometimes woke him shouting in the night. But these challenges were balanced by unexpected joys. The breathtaking beauty of dawn breaking over the valley, the satisfaction of working together to build something lasting, the deep and growing intimacy between them that transcended the physical. Ryker proved to be a patient teacher as Naomi learned the skills needed for ranch life. He showed her how to ride Western style, to identify the herbs that grew wild on their land, to handle the gentle mares he bred with such care. In turn, Naomi brought music and literature into their home, reading aloud in the evenings as they sat before the fire, teaching Ryker to dance in their small cabin by the light of oil lamps. Spring gave way to summer, and summer to fall. As the aspens turned gold on the mountainsides, Naomi discovered she was with child. The news transformed Ryker, his quiet pride and tenderness, as he laid his hand on her still flat stomach, brought tears to her eyes. "I never thought I'd have a family again," he confessed one night as they lay together in the darkness. "After Nathan died, I figured that part of life was closed to me. And now," Naomi prompted, curling closer to his warmth, "now I'm terrified and happier than I've ever been." He pressed a kiss to her forehead. "You've given me a future I never dared hope for." Winter settled over the valley, transforming their world into a crystalline wonderland. The isolation was more pronounced with snow blocking the roads, but Naomi found she didn't mind. Their cabin was warm and snug, their days filled with quiet industry, their nights with loving companionship. As her body changed with pregnancy, Ryker's protectiveness increased. He insisted on handling the more strenuous chores, recruited a local boy to help with the horses, and made regular trips to town for supplies despite the difficult travel conditions. It was on one such trip, as Naomi waited anxiously for his return during a particularly heavy snowfall, that she realized how completely her life had transformed in less than a year. From the sheltered teacher in Boston to the wife of a horse rancher in Utah Territory, expecting their first child, a journey she could never have imagined when she boarded that stagecoach last spring. When Ryker finally arrived, snow-covered and half-frozen but triumphant with supplies and letters from Mrs. Prentice, Naomi flew into his arms with such abandon that he laughed aloud. "If this is my welcome, I should leave more often," he teased, holding her close. "Don't you dare," she replied, helping him remove his snow-crusted coat. "I was worried. Takes more than a little snow to keep me from coming home to you." He rubbed his cold hands together by the fire, then turned to her with a smile. "How are you feeling? How's our little one?" "Active today," Naomi reported, guiding his hand to where their child kicked against her ribs. "I think he'll be as stubborn as his father. Or she'll be as determined as her mother," Ryker countered, his expression softening as he felt the movement beneath his palm. "I bought something in town." A surprise. From his saddlebag he produced a small, exquisitely carved wooden cradle. Old Johann the carpenter made it, said every baby needs a proper place to sleep. Tears welled in Naomi's eyes at the thoughtful gift. "It's beautiful. There's more." Ryker reached into his pocket and pulled out a folded piece of paper. "This came for you." Naomi opened it to find a letter from the school board, formally offering her a position teaching at a new school to be built closer to the outlying ranches in the spring. The letter noted her exemplary character and teaching ability and expressed hope that she would consider the position once her maternal duties permitted. "They want me back," she said, disbelieving. "Of course they do. You're the best teacher this county has ever seen." Ryker's pride was evident in his voice. "Town's growing. They need good teachers more than they need to hold onto outdated judgments." Naomi reread the letter, emotions warring within her. "I don't know if I want to go back. Our life here will still be here," Ryker finished for her. "If you want to teach again, we'll make it work. If you don't, that's fine too. The choice is yours, Naomi, always." The freedom of that choice, so different from the ultimatum she'd faced months ago, filled her with gratitude. "Thank you for understanding." "I understand because I love you," Ryker said simply. "All of you, including the teacher who can't help but educate everyone around her." His eyes crinkled with affection. "You've certainly taught me a thing or two." "Oh, such as?" Naomi asked, enjoying the playful mood that had replaced their earlier worry. "That second chances are real. That love doesn't have to hurt. That a woman found half drowned by a flooded road can change a man's entire life." He drew her close, his hand resting protectively over their unborn child. "That family isn't just what you're born into, but what you build together." Naomi leaned into his embrace, savoring the security and love she found there. "Do you ever regret it, stopping that day instead of riding on?" "Never," Ryker said firmly. "Best decision I ever made." "Even with all the gossip and trouble it caused, even then?" He tilted her chin up to meet his gaze. "When I found you that day, you were so cold, so still. I thought for a moment you were already gone. Getting you warm, getting you safe, became the only thing that mattered. And when you finally opened your eyes in my cabin, something in me changed forever." Naomi remembered those first confused moments of waking, the strange man telling her she was safe, that the worst was over. "You said I was warm now, that it was over." "The danger was," Ryker agreed. "But for us, it was just beginning." He kissed her gently. "The best kind of beginning." As snow fell softly outside their cabin window, Naomi knew he was right. What had seemed like an ending her collapse beside that flooded road had actually been the first chapter of the most important story of her life. A story that would continue with the child growing beneath her heart, with the school that might someday welcome her back, with the love that had found her when she least expected it. "I'm glad you found me," she whispered against his lips. "I'll always find you," Ryker promised. "Wherever life takes us, whatever floods we face, I'll always come for you, Naomi." And she believed him, this man who had saved her body that stormy day and her heart every day since. In his arms she was warm now. The worst was over. The best was just beginning.